Artists were panicking. The world was in shambles. It was 2020. And I quit. My creative dreams, my acting goals, everything was pointing towards this bright light that I was getting closer and closer to until I stopped everything and let the winds float me back to ground zero. And the worst part was it felt like a breath of fresh air. And I had to ask myself, do I really deserve to be an artist if I feel this way? So yeah, I quit acting school and got a real job. And this is what happened. But we're gonna use some of my lessons along the way to help us all write the futures of our artistic career. Let's get right into it. As a performer living in New York City, I had a lot of ideals crammed into my head. I don't deserve to be getting paid anything more than minimum wage, and I shouldn't expect ever having anything more. I'm always going to need to work a part-time job because that's the reality of being an artist. I will never have consistency in my life. That's just not the career path that I chose. And last, but maybe the most important, my reality is always going to be left up to other people. Casting directors, producers, studio owners, agents, managers. It is not up to me. Our subconscious tells us that the only thing we can do to succeed is to settle. If I'm gonna want to produce my own work, I'm gonna have to settle by asking friends and family members for money. If I want to be on a big stage, I have to live in New York City. Probably always gonna rent, probably always gonna live in a really small spot, and I probably won't be able to have a social life or vacations or a family or friends or fun things to do ever, because if somebody casts me, I'm gonna have to put everything aside to make everyone else happy. You might have been planted a lot of seeds from people in your life who might have the best of intentions, but might also not be fully empowering you to carve your own path. I want you to really see if you are living in this starving artist trap. Break out of this prison that is this idea that if you're a creative, if you're an artist, you're only going to be able to do so much with your life. You're always going to be at the mercy of other people. You're never going to have the final say. You're always going to be relying on the outside world to dictate your reality. You get up and grind and hustle and do all these things, but there's no control over any of that. Is this a mindset that you've been told? That was kind of the first thing that I realized. I'm telling myself that there is only one path to my own personal success and happiness. There's a lot of fear that you don't want to get trapped in something. You don't want to get trapped in a full-time job, trapped by not living in the city. If you're not living in the city, you're missing out on so many opportunities. And if you're not auditioning and submitting to everything, then that could have been your one thing and you missed out on it, which keeps you in this trap even longer. That leads me to my next point, silence in the ether. 2020 happened. And just like many of us, I had a good year and a half, 2 years to really think about what I valued in life. What were things I was doing because I thought I had to do them, and not really because it was making me feel happy. This is like the climax of a movie. Maybe there was a universal need for a reset for all of us because we were all getting so caught up in everything. It was a forced pause, forced reconsideration of what am I doing this all for? I was in a movement class at the Esper Studio in 2019. I meditated at the beginning of every class. My movement instructor said, think about a space where you feel the most at peace. I couldn't think of any space. He said, maybe it's bed, waking up and not having anywhere to go. And I was like, well, then I'm wasting time and that makes me anxious. He said, well, maybe it's outside in nature, frolicking through a flower field. That means that I'm spending time distracted and not actually going for my goals. I could not, for the life of me, consider the idea of slowing down just for a moment. But this silence in the ether is essential for us to really get to the root of what do we want to do? What is our mission? What is our vision? What is our purpose in this world? What is our why? Sometimes it's thrust upon us like 2020, but you have to create your own silence in the ether moments through things like meditation, going to hot yoga, going in a sauna, getting a massage, acupuncture, walks, sitting in the bathtub, earthing, being in nature. Now let's break this down. First of all, ether, the electromagnetic field that surrounds us and everything in the universe. Negative space. space is kind of how I see it. And then silence is no noise. And noise doesn't necessarily mean sound, but I mean the noise in your head that's always asking questions, the noise in your head that you turn on because you want there to be something. I have noise in my head all the time. I turn on Seinfeld in the background when I'm working. There's a lot of different noises that I could very much do without. Silence to you could mean the hum of people in the background, but it's so distant that it's almost comforting. It could be relaxing music that's ethereal, the love frequency. It doesn't need to be complete silence, but it really is, what is your silence? I am sure you learned a lot of things during our collective silence in the ether of 2020. I personally learned a few things that literally changed the trajectory of my life. The first one was I was a homebody. I loved being at home. I did not like commuting, getting on public transit and jumping from bus to train to walking. It got me out of my spirituality, out of my body, and it made me feel like I had to zone everything out. I always had headphones in and I was always plugged into a laptop because I had to escape it. I felt the most present when I was actually at home, which obviously was really easy for me to embrace during that time. And then I said, oh my gosh, how do I pursue a career in the arts if I'm a homebody? But I'll get to that. I loved acting, but I did not like living in the city. I've tried living in the city a few times. I initially started out in college in the city, and 4 days into it, I was like, I do not like it here. I am not happy. It is not making me feel inspired. I feel drained, exhausted, disconnected from nature. And for a while I was like, I guess I'm not a real artist because real artists have to handle the city, is what I was told. I also learned that I loved spending time with people who I could talk to about the craft and philosophies and the psychology of our art. When I was at the Esper studio, those are the types of people I was with. I really wanted to surround myself more with people like that. Probably the best part about giving yourself silence in the ether, it'll start giving you ideas for having a multifaceted, deep career in your art. When I go to acupuncture, when I go to yoga, I have these aha moments. The amount of times I've had like a YouTube video idea or a song lyric when I'm just not thinking about it. It's reverse psychology. When you're placing yourself in situations where you're just focusing on being present, that's where your ideas come. That's why this is so important. I'm sure you had a lot of ideas in 2020 and realized, wow, I should do this. And that's how I got started working in marketing and being like, I'm gonna work fully remote. I wanna save my in-person energy for when I'm performing and creating music. That's when I kind of got that idea, when I had that time. Once you have this time for the silence in the ether, you can eventually find your flower field. I just talked about this example of my movement teacher asking what the perfect space that you could be in where you feel a complete sense of calm. For me, I feel like it would be a garden or a flower field, surrounded by colors, beautiful smells, people around me too, wearing really comfortable clothing. I feel the sunlight on me. There's good food around. This is the next step. When you get yourself to have silence in the ether, it will help you find your own flower field. What is your flower field? What is your purpose in being an artist? Why do you want to do this? What I realized that my flower field was, I wanted freedom and peace in my own craft. My own personal freedom was being able to create art out of my home, because now I realized I'm a homebody. I love creating my own vibes. I love having a space that I'm comfortable in, and that makes me feel more inspired. I also wanted to create a space for other people to come together. Back to talking about how I loved having conversations with people about the art and getting really deep. I wanted that community of like-minded people where everyone feels really comfortable around each other and we're all creating art together. That was my flower field. By the way, I really want to hear what yours is, so comment below what your flower field is. The first part of this goal, I then realized after I found my flower field during 2020, was financial stability. And that is where we get into the second part of this title, which is, I got a full-time job. If you're an artist, maybe you've been told that getting a full-time job, at least for me, it was like, it's a trap. You don't want to get stuck in a full-time job because then that means that you'll see that having a full-time job is easier than being an artist and then you'll get trapped in it. Maybe this is just me overwhelming myself and overthinking, but I listened to a lot of workshops in college of people saying like, don't get a full-time job because then you won't have time to work on your art. together, and then you will be exhausted from it and blah, 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 blah. So I got a full-time job. Acting school closed down. When it was ready to open back up, I said, I'm gonna stay in this full-time job. It was a really, really freaking hard decision. Ultimately, I realized I want to be able to not have my entire reality relying on someone else casting me. And the first step to this was getting a full-time job so I could get the finances to make that happen. I was a content writer at a tech startup, and it was wonderful. Strategize and pay your dues, my friend. Pay your dues. This is where people go wrong, because getting a full-time job as an artist isn't bad. It's when you get a full-time job and you don't have a long-term plan. That's when you can get stuck and feel like you have no direction and feel like you're just staying in this job and you don't know where else to go. Let's just consider that I got stuck in a full-time job for 1.5 years. I was 100% remote. I worked with amazing people. I was never asked to work overtime. I was learning about how to grow with a company, and I actually learned how a business ran. I actually learned how we price things out as a company, what type of customers we should attract, how we should write to that specific customer. And for the first time, compared to the hustle culture that I was living in before, I could get up at a decent hour. I didn't have to commute anywhere. I was well rested. When the clock struck 6 o'clock, I could close my computer and I was done. I didn't have to wake up wondering when's my next income stream gonna come. I had vacation time, and for the first time, I got a little glimpse also, not only into the financial freedom, but the freedom of being able to have a consistent source of income. For this, it was generated by a business, but eventually I could be my own business. Of course, there were days that I was still really exhausted. This wasn't necessarily work that I was super passionate about. I really enjoyed the people I was working with, and that's what got me through it, but I wasn't waking up like screaming for joy. This is why during this time, I had to focus on thriving through my goals. And I say through because while this isn't necessarily a goal, I did at once have a goal of I want to get a full-time job. I'm thriving through this goal of having a full-time job on to the next one. I talked about goals a little bit in some of my last videos, having a manifestation lock screen that incrementalized goals into very short time frames. And if you are working full-time, you know the amount of time that you can dedicate to this. It's gonna be like on your lunch break, after work, before work. You can create these goals for yourself during this full-time job, and that's what I did. When things get tough, I always knew I have these goals that I'm working towards. I'm not just floating and waiting to get a promotion. I never didn't have a direction. After I stopped working the full-time job and switched to full-time freelancing, that was a goal too, switch to full-time freelancing. And then I had another goal of switching to more high-paying clients that are on a monthly retainer, so I don't have to feel like I don't know where my next paycheck is coming from. Goals are ever changing. It's never like, I reached this goal and I'm done. You should always have goals, but you should also always be present. And yes, looking back on the surface, the title of your story could be, I quit acting and got a full-time job. But in reality, the depth of that story is, I saw I was living in a trap. I found silence in my ether. I discovered my flower field. I strategized, I paid my dues, and now we're thriving through our goals. I'll see you next time. Bye. About this. I think one of my cats wants to come in. I think it's Lila. I knew it. You're in. You're in. Are you happy? I gotta keep it closed.